Hello. Soup time. I can't help myself. I'm making another soup for you. This one is the easiest tomato basil. I love it. I've been making it long time. I got the recipe back when we used to live in Nashville, Tennessee from my friend Ellen Costello. Hey, Ellen. And I actually still have the little recipe card I even got from her. See, I do have recipe cards and I sometimes write them down. I have adjusted it just a touch because that's what I do. But I love this tomato basil soup. It's great because it comes together really fast and easy, and you don't have to have cream on hand because a lot of times that's a specialty ingredient for people. It actually thickens with the basics of a roux, which is equal parts fat and flour. So gluten-free, you'd have to adjust it, which I have many times. I've done gluten-free all-purpose flour and it's worked pretty well. So what I start with is olive oil, which is good for you, right? Good healthy fat. And I get my olive oil warmed up in a pan. And this recipe I'm actually doubling because I'm making a bigger batch. I'm actually cooking for my church for the next few months, and this is one of the soups I'm serving tonight. This one along with my chicken sausage vegetable soup. I just made that as well, but I already showed you that one. So I'll get the olive oil in the pan and get that, the pan's already hot, added the olive oil, and now I will add 2 chopped onions. So if I was doing it the regular way, it's just a 1/3 cup olive oil and 1 onion, medium-ish is what I do. And you can just dice it up. You'll end up pureeing the soup, so you don't have to have your chopping be perfect. It can just be, be a small dice, regular dice, just chunk it up. Don't worry too much, but you do want it to be pretty even so it'll cook through. But you just get this, onion just sauteing lightly in the olive oil. And like I said from my last soup recipe, the chicken sausage vegetable soup, so much of good soup making really is in the building of the flavors and not rushing it. And this is especially true with this soup. I've found over the years that I've made it, the longer I let that onion hang out and just get really soft and tender. A lot of vegetables, you might be surprised to learn, do have sugar in them, or natural sugars, but when you let that onion slowly cook, the natural sugar kind of gets released. You're not going to caramelize the onion, but you really want it to be real tender and let that natural sweetness come out, and that acts as a really good balance to the acidic tomatoes that you add. So these are going, they're nice and tender, and what I will do now, they're still getting a little bubbly, I turn it off first, is I'm going to just sprinkle in my, it's kind of hard to sprinkle with my, I'm not left-handed, my flour in here. And this is, when you put fat and flour together, you create a beautiful way to thicken things. So this, you guys, is also called a roux. It can be done with butter and flour. It can be done with oil and flour. In culinary school, they just called it fat and flour. So it gets kind of gummy. But that's what's going to give it that beautiful thickness without adding any cream. So if you're somebody who's got dairy issues, this is a great recipe. And you always want to let, when you add flour to something like this, you always want to let it cook out for a little bit so it doesn't have kind of that raw flour taste. Okay, my flour is being all cooked out. Everything is looking really good. I forgot to also mention garlic. So the regular recipe calls for just a teaspoon of garlic, and I have my fun little, mini frozen things. These are my basil ones. See, they come in basil. Isn't that cool? And I'll be using those in a second. But I just popped those in as well with the onions. I forgot to mention that I did that. So that's all going. And so once it's thick, what you'll do is then slowly add in your chicken broth. When you add this chicken stock kind of nice and slow, the broth gets nice and thick and kind of cloudy, almost as if there was creaminess into it. And I'm just going to stir that through. It doesn't, because the flour's been in there cooking, it doesn't get glumpy or kind of goopy binding together. Like sometimes you can add stock into a roux mixture and you have to be real gentle because of the onion and the liquid from the onion that's also in there with the oil. It seems to not clump up. So next up is tomatoes. And this recipe will have 4 cans of the tomatoes going in. So just these guys. Use what you have. I happen to still have some petite dice going on because you are going to be blending this whole thing together. The regular, I'll probably post on this one. I'll post the recipe because I feel like I'm being confusing with my quantities since I've doubled the recipe. But the regular recipe calls for The original, here's where I did some tweaking. The original one just calls for 1 can of chopped tomatoes, but I wanted it a little more tomatoey, so I added a second can. But you get those going in there, and then the basil. So again, 2 teaspoons of dried basil, but these little guys, this chopped basil, again in those little cool ice trays, each one represents a teaspoon of basil. So I happen to have these on hand. I'm putting them in because I ran out of my dried basil. And here's what it looks like when it's just hanging out and unblended through. But you guys will see how gorgeous it is once you've blended this all up. And I have one of those great stick blenders I'll show you here in a little bit. But this is just I crank the heat up to high. I'm gonna let it kind of come to a nice bubble. I also added my salt and pepper, not a lot of salt because that broth is pretty salty. And once this comes to a bubble, I'll turn it down to low, and it's gonna just simmer for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then I'll blend it up and it's ready to roll. Soup's been going for almost half an hour. So now I'm gonna use my awesome stick blender. So if you haven't used one of these before, they are very handy. This is again one of those dating me very old products because I got it when I got married 24 years ago and it's still working. But they're really, really handy for soups that you want to blend or for quick milkshakes or whatever. I'm not trying to endorse this product, but it makes the soup especially easy. If you don't have one of these, but you have a blender, what you want to do with the soup is ladle it out in batches. You got to be really careful because it is super hot, but ladle it out in batches and blend it to a smooth puree. But I get to use this and just do it right in the pot, which is awesome. So I'll show you how it's done. My soup is nice and bubbly. You can see it's kind of thick, but I'm just going to stick this right in here and go. Hopefully you can hear me. I will go round and round with this. I'll show you what it looks like in just a sec when I'm all done. All right, finally finished. Blended my stick blender through there for, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes or so. It just depends on how big of a pot you have and how good your stick blender works. Or if you're, again, doing it by blender, then just be careful and do it in batches. Do not overfill your blender. And put a towel on top as well. Another little tip when you blend hot things. I've made this so many times and people swear that there's cream in it because it does have a real velvety, luscious texture to it. It's very smooth, but it's not real heavy, which I also like. So if you're somebody who has a problem with dairy, or you're just trying to maybe cut back on some of the heavier fats or whatever, then this is a great option for you. And like I said, I've made it gluten-free before. Just do like an all-purpose gluten-free flour when you do the stage of making the roux, and it works. It's not the same, but it works totally fine. I would say the flavor, because I know the recipe so well. I've been making it, like I said, for so many years. But it is a great dairy-free, gluten-free option if you have people in your life or you yourself are trying to watch those things or you just can't have gluten or dairy. So love this one. Give it a whirl. I'm going to taste it. Oh, you guys, it's my favorite. I haven't made it because it's just coming off of summer. I haven't had it in a while, but it's so good. It's kind of sweet from the development of the onions, and like I said, that lusciousness from the roux that you kind of make in the beginning with the olive oil and the flour with the onion, and then the tomatoes in there and the basil. It's just a really well-balanced soup. And again, it's so easy because you have so many, my oven's ready for my bread that I have to put in, but you have so many of these ingredients oftentimes on hand. Can of diced tomatoes, chicken stock, an onion, and then the spices, basil, salt, pepper, and then a little garlic. And I do, fresh garlic or whatever. But you guys, give it a try. Let me know what you think. It is one of my all-time favorites and my family's favorites. So thanks again.